You may start.
All right, thank you. I'd like to call to order this virtual special meeting of the Planning Commission, Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission, today, April 29th at 2 p.m. In the absence of the secretary, I will call the roll, and the names are not in alphabetical order. Barry Covington. You're muted, Barry. Okay. I see that he is with us. I'm going to count you present, sir.
Mike, you want to turn up your volume. It's a little hard to hear you.
Okay. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Barry Covington. He was here previously. Jim Ellison.
Here.
Mike Strange.
Present.
Rachel Macha.
Here.
Steve Kaufman.
Here.
I know that Julie Davis is absent. Nan Hunter. John Dewey.
Here.
We have a quorum, and I'd like to say the meeting is now in order at 2:02 p.m. with a quorum of members present. Today, we have a rather abbreviated agenda. I'd like to start with a verification of meeting and notice from the city secretary, please.
The agenda was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on April 19th. It was amended and reposted on April 25th. That's all I have, Chair.
All right, Ms. Secretary, do we also have, do you have anyone signed up to speak?
I have no speakers and I have received no correspondence.
All right.
Yes.
Next, I would like to please ask the Chief Building Inspector to provide us with an update. Mr. Janis?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, all. Quick update on a couple projects. Belhaven has been resubmitted for the continuation of their site plan review. Each department head that has a responsibility to report has been given the documentation, and I trust that they are authoring their reports currently and will provide them to me. So once again, if we have a code compliant plan, that gets pushed before you. Obviously, I haven't made that determination yet, but we do still have a couple days to get that done. So that's Belhaven. 330 Rehoboth has been pulsing me on a couple different ideas here and there, but nothing substantial, and nothing has been submitted to date. So there's really no information so much on that. There was a court-ordered lot separation on Columbia Avenue that I believe Glenn Mandalis, Mr. Meta, and myself have been discussing. You should see that soon before you, probably the next meeting. I'm working with the applicant right now to get the paperwork submitted to get that in so it comes before you. And of course, there's other rumors flying about the city of other projects, but nothing substantial has been submitted, and everything is kind of going as normal.
All right, sir. Thank you.
You're
Mr.
quite
Mata.
welcome.
Mr. Mata, could you please give us a litigation update?
Yes, sure. So there are three matters that I believe everybody is aware of generally that are currently in some form of litigation. The first is the Belhaven matter. This is a petition for writ of certiorari that was filed with the Delaware Superior Court seeking a review of the Board of Adjustment's January 24, 2022 decision granting a variance on floor area ratio. That matter remains before the Superior Court. Briefing is not completed and oral argument has not been set in that matter. So that is the Belhaven review or request for review of the Board of Adjustment variance. Next, Beach Walk. That matter is pending before the Delaware Supreme Court, highest court in Delaware. Briefing on that matter before the Supreme Court is also not yet completed, although I do believe the appellant's reply brief is due today. There was an amicus brief that was filed by a non-party, or at least requested to be filed by a non-party a few days ago. Whether oral argument gets scheduled in that matter, of course, will be for the court's discretion. Finally, in the clear space matter, this is the appeal of the Board of Commissioners decision that is also pending before the Superior Court, Judge Robinson. I am not involved in that. Someone had asked about that the other day. Obviously, I'm not involved in that matter going forward. And here again, briefing on that matter is still not completed. In fact, I think the court has not yet decided, is my understanding, that's not even decided what the record is on appeal yet. And then finally, with regard to the matter that the building inspector just mentioned, this is a Court of Chancery order resolving a fight among heirs to a property inheritance, and the court has ordered a partition. Of course, that's just simply the court resolution of a dispute between feuding siblings, and then the city will have to do its own independent analysis under the code with regard to whether partitioning is feasible. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, sir. At this time now, I do not see anyone in the meeting room to speak as to the comprehensive development plan, and no one signed up to speak. I will go ahead and open this portion of the meeting to gather public comments for the public record regarding the update of the city's comprehensive development plan. Seeing no one and hearing no one, I'd like to close the public comment record for the comprehensive development plan. Next matter on the agenda, and actually the final matter, is the consideration of the current draft of the comprehensive development plan and a possible vote. Let's begin with the consideration. And with us today is Lauren Good of Wallace Montgomery. And Lauren, I'll turn it over to you and ask that you discuss where we are, what comments have been received, what issues have been addressed, and what the next step is, please.
Great, thank you very much. Each of the Planning Commission members should have previously received a copy of the comment spreadsheet that has our initial recommendations included. Since we sent out those initial recommendations, we heard back from DelDOT as well as state planning on a few items. So we have some updates to that were provided in a separate email to the Planning Commission members. And then in addition, we received some more technical comments from Commissioner Susan Gay, which I will go over, and the only other item that we received were some responses to the comment recommendations that we had made from Nan Hunter and Julie Davis. Those were related to items in our recommendations where we specifically noted that we are seeking additional comments from the Planning Commission. So with that, I guess I will go ahead and just jump into these various documents. And I just wanted to make clear, we did not, since the comment spreadsheet was sent out and the comments themselves were posted on the city's website, we have not received any additional written comments from members of the public. The only thing that we've received, again, were comments from Commissioner Gay and Commissioners Hunter and Davis. So with that, there are a few items that I wanted to specifically discuss. The first of which is the future land use map item. So one of the comments that came from state planning that needs to be addressed in order to meet certification requirements is that any areas that the city identifies as being in a potential future annexation area, those parcels have to be assigned a future land use. So that if a petitioner would come in at some point and request that annexation, they would be looking at those future land uses as the possible future land uses and have to tie that to a city zoning classification. If there are any desires to do something beyond that, then that would, at that point, turn into an amendment to the comprehensive plan to change that future land use. So part of the documentation that I had previously sent out to the Planning Commission members was a draft updated future land use map that provided those future land use classifications in those annexation areas. We developed these using the county future land use and the county's current zoning classifications as a baseline. And we wanted to start off the discussion of that item in particular because it's the largest item and would potentially have the most changes or most impact. So I believe I can share this map, if you'll bear with me for one moment. So this shows those areas that we were discussing. This the area that is outlined in the black and green line, that's currently within the city boundaries. So it's the items that are outside of that. So I guess I will start in this area. The properties that are along Rehoboth Avenue, Rehoboth Avenue Extension and Coastal Highway, those are designated in the county's future land use plan as commercial. They also have for the most part, a commercial zoning already associated with them in the county. The other areas are the south of Coastal Highway in this area here. The county's future land use map designated these as coastal areas. They did not have a specific residential designation, but their description of the coastal areas included language saying that appropriate uses would be, among others, residential. Seeing as how they are currently in more of a residential makeup, we thought that that would be the most appropriate future land use for that area. The same holds true for the parcels north of Coastal Highway, between that and Silver Lake, behind the first few parcels that we've shown as commercial. And then similarly to the west of the Lewis and Rehoboth Canal, that area to the north that's shown on the screen in yellow, we also thought that those areas would make the most sense to maintain residential future land use.
Now, Lauren, your color coding then is yellow is residential and red is commercial, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And will that, you think, that's the response that state planning is looking for?
State planning is looking for a map of some kind. They are not necessarily going to be getting into looking at each parcel specifically to the degree is 123 Main Street commercial or residential. They're just looking at this, that we have provided these future land use designations for any areas in the potential annexation areas that the city has identified.
And so it appears that we have now done that. Is that correct with this exhibit?
That is correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So if everyone is okay with the draft that we have developed, we can move on from there, incorporate this into the draft into the plan that will come back before you at the next meeting.
Is there a consensus among the commissioners about this?
I'm fine with it.
I'm sorry?
I'm good with it.
Okay, I believe that Ms. Macha?
Yes, sorry.
Anyone else have any concerns or objections?
No objection, Mike Strange.
Okay,
No objection, Nan Hunter.
okay.
No objection, Steve Kaufman.
No objection, Jim Ellison.
No objection, John Dewey.
Okay, thank you. Lauren?
Great. The next item, just because we're already showing this map, one of the comments that we had received from the town of Henlopen Acres relates to the ownership of a segment of the Lewis and Rehoboth Canal. So if you, looking at this map, I'll pull up this area here. The area, I guess, north of where the Henlopen Acres boundary begins. So this area, as I'm attempting to show on my screen here, Henlopen Acres has provided documentation that in the 1970s, they had actually annexed this portion of the canal. For whatever reason, this is not reflected in the county mapping or the state mapping. The state maintains the municipal boundary information. This is something we've had a discussion with state planning about this, and we have also spoken with Luke Mehta and Glenn Mendelis about this item. The recommendation, because this is not something that will be cleaned up in the extreme short term, the recommendation is that for each of the maps that are included in the CDP to show this area as with a hatching over it, and then to put a footnote on the maps just saying that the ownership of this is being investigated and will be addressed at a future, within a future CDP update. So this is something that, say, at the 5-year update, the mapping could be revised to reflect any ultimate decisions that come out about this area. State planning also wanted to put some narrative language in the one of the chapters, just reflecting that situation.
Now, for purposes of what you're addressing here, the gray area, gray shaded area is the Henlopen Acres.
Correct.
And the portion of the Lewis and Rehoboth Canal that you're discussing here is immediately adjacent to that.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, next.
And then those are the, I guess, quote unquote, more major items that have come out through the comments. We have 2 other comments from state planning that are certification items. One is to just update a table number that when we were moving some of the tables into the appendix, we referenced the incorrect appendix. And then another was to include language about the intergovernmental coordination that has occurred. So we are intending to include documentation of the responses from the county and neighboring jurisdictions, and those will satisfy those certification level comments.
And so at that point, we will have addressed the issues raised in the Office of State Planning Coordination March 18th, 2022 letter.
The ones specifically from page 1 that fall under the certification comments.
Okay.
All other comments that were made as part of that letter were recommendations, and those the city can decide how, if at all, they want to address those within the plan.
So that can be a determination made by the mayor and the Board of Commissioners.
And also, our initial recommendations were provided in the spreadsheet, the comment spreadsheet with the recommendations. So those are all incorporated here. And so the Planning Commission can provide input into how those get addressed, and then we can address those in this, this next draft that the Planning Commission will ultimately vote on, and then it will go to the mayor and commissioners for them to review and adopt.
But the remaining issues outside of the certification comments from the Office of State Planning are not required to get our CDP approved.
Correct.
Okay. Anyone have any concerns about that among the planning commissions? Okay, hearing none. Lauren?
Okay. Just briefly going through here. So in the, to go about this, I'm not sure that the way that you would, that you want to go through this, but there are a few items where we noted that Planning Commission input is requested for some of these recommendations. Perhaps if we could either address those first, and then if there are any, if anyone has any thoughts or input on any recommendations that they either disagree with or want us to address differently than how we've suggested, we could revisit it that way rather than going line by line unless a comment by comment review is desired.
Okay, does anyone, is Lauren Good's suggestion to deal with those where there may be an issue or some additional information is requested? Does anyone object to having her proceed on that basis as opposed to going through every single item that's already been recommended?
No objection.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, Mike?
Yeah,
I think
yes,
that's fine.
Mr. Kaufman?
No, I think that's fine. Lauren's suggestion is fine.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
This is Barry Covington. Sorry.
I think you may have an additional microphone on, Barry.
No objection, Mike Strange.
Okay. Mr. Dewey?
No objection.
All right. Nan Hunter?
No objection.
Okay. All right, Lauren, please proceed.
No objection.
Good, thank you, Jim. Please proceed.
All right. So the, and let me reshare this spreadsheet. Okay. I have.
Lauren, can you speak up a bit? It's really difficult to hear you.
Yes. Is that better?
A little bit.
Okay. This spreadsheet, or what's showing on the screen here, I've hidden a few of the columns just to make it more legible. But the first such comment that we had requested some Planning Commission input is number 22. This is from the Office of State Planning. And in addition to congratulating the city on the plan itself and the work that has gone into it, they asked for some additional information to be discussed within the narrative about the couple of month delay that was taken to address some of the parcel-based mapping work that occurred under the prior CDP consultant. There had originally been some more detailed language in the, I believe it was the first draft that went into this in more detail. The Planning Commission subsequently asked that most of that detail be removed, and just to, I believe there's currently a paragraph that just notes the delay due to the mapping issues. So we wanted to just, I guess, check in to see what level of information you would like us to provide here, if at all. Again, this is not something that has to be addressed to meet the state's requirements, but they are asking for some additional information.
So this is simply to provide a brief summary of what the previous mapping differences between the city and county records was and what we did to address that.
Correct. And I have had some email communication with Glenn Mandalis, who was a part of those previous discussions. So we have some initial thoughts about this, and assuming the Planning Commission is in agreement, my plan would be to get that language cemented, make sure that both Mr. Mandelis and Mr. Mehta are okay with the language, that it's not, wouldn't have the potential to cause any issues down the road, and then incorporate that language in the draft that comes back to you.
Does anyone have any concerns about that or objections? That seems a fairly benign request. Hearing none?
No
No
objection.
objection.
No
I'm
objection.
Good. All right, hearing none. Lauren?
The next item is number 26. Let's see here.
It's 29.
I'm sorry?
I thought it was item 29, but maybe I'm wrong.
26 26 was actually a comment from Susan Gay, just noting that her understanding of some of the neighborhood boundaries and how they are shown in the maps related to the neighborhoods and the descriptions have some inaccuracies. That information, she had provided some initial comments, and she had also reached out to the president of the Country Club Estates Homeowners Association, who provided us with some updates. So we wanted to bring this back to your attention because the maps that we had related to this in the plan originally had been revised based on some comments that we received from Patrick Gossett. And then those revised maps are the ones where we have these comments from Susan Gay indicating that there is a discrepancy. So we really wanted to check in to see if I guess how we should redraw these boundaries, or if there was anyone who was more familiar overall with the neighborhoods, just to make sure that we are showing these in the most accurate way possible, or if we just wanted to use the modifications, particularly for Country Club Estates that were provided, and just use those and make any other changes based on that boundary realignment.
So basically, are you suggesting that you can put these exhibits in the right place at the right time and bring this back to us in what will be the latest and hopefully last draft of the CDP?
That's our intent. I've got a somewhat crude mock-up that I can share, just showing the boundaries here, and I guess whether
And this impacts Country Club Estates and School View, is that correct?
primarily, yes.
Is there someone at the city that can look at that? I would think they would understand where those boundaries are.
Yes, and I think the idea is to run those again past Commissioners Gossett and Commissioner Gay.
So we can go ahead and do that. Just wanted to bring that certainly to your attention, that those boundaries may be updated for the next draft if there are any comments on those reconfigurations. There won't be, other than redrawing the lines and adjusting the descriptions, which is a pretty minor update, doesn't substantively affect the CDP, so this would not be something that would trigger re-review by plus or anything of that nature.
Okay, so there's really nothing for us to react to today.
Correct.
All right. What do you have next?
Okay. Let's see. The next would be,
I thought it was item 29.
20. The item about the canopy coverage.
Yeah, you recommend there that
It's item 27,
the
Steve.
deletion, delete bullet, which I don't have an objection to, but you asked for some input from us.
That was a comment that also came from Commissioner Gay and the city's arborist. The canopy coverage, the way that is calculated, has changed since the existing CDP was developed. So they are just saying that it would be make the most sense to just remove this altogether, and especially since the city has not designated a goal for canopy coverage as that item would have led one to believe.
So the recommendation is simply to delete that.
Correct.
Any objections to that from the commission? Okay, hearing none.
The next item is number 31. This came from, let's see, Commissioners Hunter, Davis, and Ellison, and relates to a request to delete this table, noting that the data came from the American Community Survey, while some other tables about the same issue use the Delaware Population Consortium data, and that there's some discrepancies between the data sources that could potentially cause confusion. So they had suggested deleting those items. The American, as far as our comments on that, the American Community Survey data was used for the 2019 column. Previous data reflects the decennial census, and which is identified in the source notes, and that the state planning guidance requests that demographic information and trends should be discussed within the plan, discussed and noted within the plan itself. So our question related to this was, is the concern with this item more related to also providing the data for neighboring jurisdictions as sort of a benchmark, or with the provision of the 2019 data, and how the Planning Commission would advise we address this?
Anyone have any comments on that, please?
This is Nan Hunter. I can speak to that. The issue that we had was that, I'm sorry if there's noise in the background. There seems to be a military plane flyover happening right now where I am. Anyway, our concern was simply that having the two sources of data created disparities in what is given as the population of Rehoboth, and then in the out years when you get to like table 3.3, the population projections, and 3.4, so that and our concern is only with Rehoboth. It just creates discrepancies that are not huge, because we're talking about a small number here to begin with. But as the projections get added, then you get a sort of compounding of the discrepancies. And so at one point we drafted a paragraph that is now in there. I'm sorry, I'm not finding it right offhand, but anyway, it talks about the, summary of population data on what was page 3-33, which starts, as is evident, the numbers are estimates. For example, the census estimates population at X. Delaware population uses the figure of Y. The actual rate of population was much lower than, in fact, than the rate projected by the DPC going forward. So we just thought that created unnecessary sense of discrepancy in data. And when I looked up some guidance for the comprehensive development plan, I believe that I read that that we are instructed to use the Delaware Population Consortium data. I think the ACS and the census data are sort of, supposed to be icing on the cake. But in this event, it seemed to us like the icing kind of, confused the message on the cake. So that's the reason for it. There's obviously it's obviously not a kind of life or death issue here, except that it does, to the extent we have talked among the commissioners, for example, about whether we think the population is growing or how much it's growing, or is it really growing, or is it, is the off-season population growing, and so forth. So although these are small numbers, they do raise some questions specific to planning. And so it was the concern that the discrepancies raise issues specific to planning that led us to conclude that since we must use the Delaware data, the DPC data, that we just stick with one source of data and sort of use that consistently throughout these tables. So that's the reasoning behind the comment that we put in on this.
Does anyone have any objection to that? Okay, hearing none. Lauren?
Okay. The next item is also relates to data, and that is number 38. So this actually relates between items 38, 39, and 40. These reference tables within the draft that are the racial composition change in the city's racial composition, and then the Hispanic and Latino origin data. So the initial comment was to leave in those first two tables, but to include the Hispanic or Latino origin data as part of those. And the reason that we have kept them separate stems from some of the classifications at the federal level where they solicit this data separately. So there's a question through the census about what a respondent's race is, and then what their Hispanic or Latino origin is. So, for example, you could have a combination of both of those.
I'm sorry, this is Nan Hunter. I think, again, this is comments that were put in by myself and Julie and Jim. And I apologize for interrupting, but I think we can move on from this, because in our most recent responses, we had said that the original suggestion was to compress the two for purposes of space, but we acknowledge what Lauren has just been saying, that I think the standard presentation protocols do separate, race and ethnicity in this way to make those distinctions more clear. And so we withdrew our objection. I think it's not worth combining the tables for space purposes, when that would put the presentation outside the norms of how these data are supposed to be presented as we understand it. So we have no, if there's no other objection, we withdraw our objection.
Okay, thank you. Lauren?
The next item is number 42. The Delaware State Historic Preservation Office recommended creating a new architectural design manual and reviving the Architectural Review Task Force in the future. They also recommended conducting an updated architectural survey to, I guess, survey any properties that may fit the minimum age requirements for National Register listing. So this, again, came through plus comments, is not something that we have to include, but it is their recommendation. I know we've had some discussions about that design manual and have moved it in different places and have included this. But we wanted to verify with the Planning Commission the preferred course of action to take as it relates to that comment in particular.
Now, is this something that the Planning Commission would be tasked with updating the architectural design manual and basically an historic survey? Or is this something that the Planning Commission would recommend be done by the city?
I think it would likely be the latter. Because the survey itself would need to be conducted by someone who has the certification requirements under the Secretary of the Interior standards. And then as far as the architectural design manual, I guess that would be, there's a few different ways to potentially address that, whether that's done by the Planning Commission, if this Architectural Review Task Force is recreated and is tasked with doing that. There's a few different ways of looking at that. It would, I guess, at this point, just be a question of whether the Planning Commission recommends going to that level or just, I believe that currently there's a suggestion to revisit that manual to review it and go from there.
So would the recommendation simply be that these things be done, but without getting into the specifics of who, how, and when?
I think that level of specificity it certainly wouldn't be required in the plan and would also likely be too much information because that's something that, for example, actually doing the survey would require putting out an RFP or something of that nature, which is under the city purview.
Does anyone have an objection to simply having as the comment from the Planning Commission on this particular issue be that we recommend that these matters be done, the architectural design manual be updated, and the historic survey be undertaken, and stop at
Mike,
that?
it's Barry Covington. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I apologize earlier. I don't know why my laptop, sometimes the microphone works and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm now on my phone. I just have a question. Exactly what is an architectural design manual and an architectural review task force and what that means? I mean, is it just identifying properties or meet a certain age requirement, or is it identifying properties that someone believes to have architectural significance? And if so, what is the legal consequences of this? I mean, are these properties frozen from renovation without getting the city involved? So I just like to know a little bit more of what we're talking about here.
And
I'd be happy to respond.
can I comment on that?
Yeah, Mr. Ellison?
Okay, I would too. Go ahead, you go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I believe the statement in 42 is somewhat backwards. I think what they recommended was to revise the manual and to create a new task force. So the wording is reversed. And quite separate from that is an architectural survey. But the originally, the Architectural Review Task Force was set up, and I was on that as the only architect on it. And the purpose of that was to assess whether or not the city should, in fact, establish an architectural review process. And after all the meetings that the task force had, in the end, we decided that the architecture in the city is far too varied and complex, and that it would be better for us, rather than to try to go that route, to instead create the architectural design manual, which is still active and up on the website. The purpose of the manual was, in fact, to give guidance to homeowners, to builders, to architects, contractors, and others about, what stylistic and other aspects of architectural design made sense for the city. And I think we did that. I'm not sure that I think the design manual needs to be redone. It's kind of a timeless piece, and it hasn't been used all that effectively, I would say, by anybody. But I don't believe that it necessarily needs to be revised. And the only purpose for having another architectural review task force would be the same question. Do we want to somehow establish a design review, a formal design review process? And quite separate from all of that is the notion of an architectural survey. There was one done. I don't remember the date, but this is for a very different purpose, which is to see if there are buildings, structures, both in any segment, whether it be residential, commercial, or otherwise, that meet the minimum age requirement for listing on the National Register. That's a totally separate subject. And I think we could suggest that that might be a useful thing. But I just, I think there are several questions here, and I'm not quite sure how the Planning Commission wants to go with it, but at least that's an explanation.
Question though, is the design manual, is that just voluntary? I mean, does a builder?
Yes, it's voluntary, once again, because we did not feel that we could go so far as to mandate it and have it as a part of a formal design review process.
Can I comment on some of this?
Yes.
First, I agree with everything that Jim has just said. The problem with a design guideline, but it's strictly voluntary, is, as he said, it very seldom is used. And one way in which to get it to be utilized more, well, there's two ways. You can do a statute that says you got to follow it, which I agree we probably shouldn't do, but you can also refer to it in your zoning ordinance that these are the recommended guidelines, and that they are recommended that people who are designing or changing or building structures follow them as much as possible. We don't have that as part of the zoning ordinance right now. We just have the architectural design guidelines. Whether they need to be updated or not, I don't know. I haven't really looked at them. With regard to the survey, again, other than doing a survey so that you might be able to go into the registry as the historic registry, unless the city decides that it wants to create some statutory language to either create historic districts or to require certain properties to be historically maintained because of their architectural significance, you're not going to get very much done. We already did a survey, according to Jim, and maybe to update it might be okay, but the only thing you're going to get out of it is possibly properties becoming part of the register. The way properties are being torn down right now, I'm not too sure there'll be much left to do in a couple more years. So those are just my thoughts. But I do think the architectural design guidelines should probably be referenced in the future amendments to the zoning ordinance. And both the architectural guidelines, the architectural guidelines, if we are going to review them, that should be done by qualified consultant, such as Lauren's company. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, let me respond. Again, don't we have a building code right now that limits the height of the building, limits the setbacks, limits the square footage? I don't know the architectural design. I mean, what is pretty to one person is not necessarily attractive to another. Right now we have modern homes being built that really don't look beachy, but they're working out. And I'm just afraid we get this review manual, it becomes law, and all of a sudden homeowners are told they have to build basically a beach house. And I'm just opposed to that.
Well, I was referring more to things like environmentally positive architectural materials, things like green roofs, things like solar, things like that to be incorporated into designs, not necessarily telling people what to design. That's generally what you would have in architectural guidelines that are trying to be more environmentally sensitive, things of that nature.
In the current draft of the CDP, so draft number 5, on page 3-20, we have 5 action items that, from my reading, have addressed a lot of this comment already. That is to evaluate the feasibility and desirability of local historic district designation, historic preservation regulations, and advisory committee creation. Actively promote use of the architectural design manual as a positive aid to property owners and their designers and builders. Review and update, if needed, the city's architectural design manual. Consider adopting an architectural review procedure with defined design guidelines with identified thresholds that may be implemented by the city staff and appropriate city commissions and boards. And lastly, to reevaluate architectural review procedures and guidelines and consider whether exterior modifications will need to meet certain thresholds for building permit approval. So in my mind, the item related to—
I think that's sufficient, yeah.
That really should have already addressed the question about either a new or updated design manual and the task force. So it seems that the remaining piece of that, it relates to the survey itself. And any properties that have been constructed since the original survey was completed.
Does anyone have an objection to going with what is currently in the CDP, the draft CDP 5 on this topic, and adding to that we recommend that an historic survey be updated? That's all. Not that we will do it, but that we recommend that, and if the city wants to do that, they certainly can.
Yeah, this is Rachel. Sorry, I've been raising my hand. I agree. I think we should stay high level. We've had so much conversation on this section, and I think the one thing that kept coming back at me in the feedback that we received from the state was the fact that they said that we really should consider updating that manual if we're going to use it. So the other thought I had was, should we pull that? I know we've had this conversation. Should we pull the manual out and put it as an addendum or an exhibit instead of having it in the document, but then reference that this kind of document would need to be updated, if we decide to follow through on some of these tasks?
Well, let me just add, I think the language that we already have covers all of this. I frankly would not add anything to do with a survey because we already have that information. Yes, there would be additional buildings and homes that might be eligible, but keep in mind that the whole process of going for National Register listing is a very personal process, and it requires a hell of a lot of personal time and commitment to cause it to happen. So I'm, if a homeowner or a business property owner decides they want to go for that, they'll find out whether they're eligible or not, and they will proceed because that's the only way they'll get it done. So I'm not sure that it's worth the city spending more time and effort and money redoing the architectural survey. So I personally feel that the language we have in the CDP right now covers it adequately.
My comment would be that, first of all, I agree with Mr. Ellison, and that in my experience, having properties listed on the Federal Register is a property by property event. And so if the homeowner or the commercial property owner wants to do that, they can. But they can do it building by building. You need not have to have a city policy about that.
Right.
I agree with you. I'm just going to come back to the comment that we received back regarding the current manual. Do we just need to acknowledge that would need to be updated? I guess that goes back to Lauren. Is that important to do?
Make that comment in what place? I mean, I believe that portion of the comment is already addressed by existing action items that are in draft number 5. But as procedurally, we'll be responding back to the Plus agency with comments about how we have addressed each of the various items in that letter, whether it's we decided no change was required, or noting the specific changes that were made. So for that particular item, we can note that those have already been addressed in existing action items A through E.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. I'm fine with that.
Okay, any objections to that? That sounds like a perfectly appropriate response. All right, Lauren?
All right, the next is comment number 72. And this was a Plus comment from the State Housing Authority. So here they note that they've identified that the city is looking to have a mix of housing types, and they support those efforts. And due to the challenges that we've outlined, of course, it being a resort community and whatnot, they encouraged consideration of some strategies that they have found to be effective in resort communities in general, looking at long-term affordability programs and tools to preserve public investment and ensuring sustainable, affordable housing stock, provision of employee-occupied rental units within commercial and public facilities, coordinating with other area towns to identify and implement regional strategies for addressing affordable housing needs. If the Planning Commission is interested in incorporating these, we would just put the relevant language into either the narrative or to an action item. But it's completely up to you whether or how much of those suggested strategies we incorporate.
Hi, this is Nan Hunter. The only question I have about that is the provision. I mean, we acted with regard to categories of mixed use, specifically regarding rental units within commercial zones. So I think we've endorsed that in some sense, but it does also say rental units within public facilities. And I'm just not sure what public facilities, which I assume would be city-owned facilities, there are where there could be any residential rental units. So, you know, I just wonder if we want to include that phrase. Now, maybe there's something I'm not thinking of and I'm overlooking, but I couldn't think of any examples, so that if the city sort of comes back and says, well, yeah, right, what public facilities do you, where are the public facilities where you think we're going to put rental units? I'm not sure what my answer would be.
And my reading of this is they'd be looking for any of those units to be occupied by employees. So an example that it isn't applicable to Rehoboth, but if there was a park and there was a park warden, they would be given housing as part of that property as a perk to their, as a benefit with their job. So that's the very first example that came to mind as something that would fit that description. I would agree with you that I don't know at Rehoboth's level if there's anything really applicable that would make sense there. But for some other examples on that commercial side, in some other places I've seen some regulations that allow for a living unit within a commercial facility, for example, for a security guard or something of that nature.
No, I don't have any problem with that. I just question, including public facilities if in fact there are none. I don't want to make a big thing of this, but it seems a bit like boilerplate if we're including language that we really, think doesn't apply to Rehoboth. That's my only concern.
Does anyone have any problem
Steve,
with striking that?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Steve Kaufman. Lauren, I think they here because they want us to put more meat on the bone for this affordable housing area. And that's why they've suggested some of these. So my question to you is, can we include some of them in the language, such as, coordinating with other jurisdictions, or, some of them, so that the state sees us as making more of an effort than just saying we can have renting in commercial. But I think that they put this because they want us to put some more potential things that we can do, such as preserve public investment and ensure sustainable affordability housing. I mean, there are some programs, for example, where mortgages and other things have been written down by June so that it can be more affordable. I'm not suggesting that we put something in here where we should have some statutory requirements for affordability, but I think most possibly could be added to give us a little bit more strength in this area. So I'm interested in your response to that.
Could I just clarify? I support that, Steve. The only question I have about this language relates to that one phrase. I think the other ideas are good ideas.
Yeah, I understood that, Nan. I did understand that.
I believe that we can incorporate those. For number 3, I think that's something that we can easily incorporate. I know that Sussex County is also looking to do this, that same item. So they've started a affordable housing work group. That might be not be the correct terminology, but they are looking into this effort more so within the last not too long ago. For numbers 1 and 2, without the public facility component, I think that's something that we could include language about addressing in a future regulation review, just something about reviewing the potential for long-term affordability provisions or employee-occupied units within commercial facilities as something to consider after adoption as we move into the zoning regulation update phase. But not commit the city one way or the other. That way, if it ends up not being feasible, we don't have to do it.
Does anyone have an objection to that? Because I believe, Lauren, this is also a recommendation, but not a required certification matter.
You are correct.
Anybody have any objection to her thoughts on this?
I'm not sure exactly what Lauren said, but it says encourages consideration of the following. So I don't understand why public facilities shouldn't remain. It's not saying that'll happen. It just says we consider the possibility. So I think the language is perfectly fine.
Do we need to take a vote on this?
I'm fine with Lauren's suggestions. So.
Yeah, I don't want us to spend any more time on this.
Okay.
Much to do about
Mr.
nothing.
Covington, can we overrule you by consensus?
If you need an affordable house, Mike, I don't think it's not much to do about nothing. You know, this is a pretty big issue in our country.
No, I was referring to the fact that we're getting into the as is, let it go.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Kaufman, I'm not sure I understood your comment, but all I'm trying to do is move this forward so we can get through the analysis of what needs to be done.
We agree with you. Move it forward.
Oh, and this is Luke. Just Mike, I think you need to make sure clear what have we just resolved?
I'm not sure.
All right, look, I'll withdraw the objection. I thought it was, I thought it would make the document a tiny bit stronger to keep it within the realm of what we're really thinking about here. But let's just go on.
All right, objection withdrawn. What's next, Lauren?
The next is comment number 73 from Barry Brandt. His comment, let's see, in particular addresses the information that's in Chapter 6, which is the chapter on transportation. He noted that more effort needs to be given to the traffic problems the city will be seeing now and in the future. We have a comment, or we have an action item currently that notes that discusses the need to hire a transportation consultant specifically to both review traffic patterns and develop a plan to address them. He noted that he felt that the problem wasn't being sufficiently addressed, and to not add more definitive action items would be a shortfall in the CDP, and requested more definitive action items related to traffic volume, traffic speed, traffic calming, parking, and potential shuttle services. We had some similar comments come up previously related to this, and the discussions of the Planning Commission at that point indicated more that the keeping it at the desire to bring in that specialist consultant to look at traffic and transportation generally is the way that they wanted to go, rather than to highlight specific items without that more transportation professional review of what the problems are and resulting implementation items. So we wanted to see if you were okay keeping the language as is about the need to hire that consultant, or if there was additional items to pull into this. And I just wanted to point out, because this has, depending on the level of detail that this may trigger, or the extent of any new studies or things of that, this may have the potential to trigger a re-review by plus. So I just wanted to point that out depending on how much of a change is desired related to that language.
This is very coveting. I say just keep it the way it is.
I agree.
Yeah, so do I. Question. What did you mean? What trigger a review, Lauren? What are you saying?
The plus review, any changes that are made that are of a substantive nature that do not directly address a comment provided by a plus review agency has the potential to trigger a new review by plus. So if it's something that's not like a technical edit or a more of an editorial type thing, that's more substantive, that isn't addressing a comment from one of those state agencies or one of the comments from the county or the towns, it could generate the need to go back through that plus process.
So just better to stay where we are, sounds like.
Totally, yes.
Is that the consensus?
Agreed.
Okay,
Agree.
anybody object? All right, thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. The next comment that I wanted to bring up is number 122. This was a comment through the plus process from DelDOT. They recommended consideration be given to limiting vehicle access on the loop around the Rehoboth Avenue bandstand, limiting that to transit vehicles and vehicles that are unloading and loading. So basically keeping general automobiles out of that area.
Was that something the commission needs to take a position on?
They do not have to. We can choose not to address it or address it. Since this is something coming from Plus, our response would not trigger a new review regardless of how it's treated.
Anybody have any thoughts on this particular issue of traffic movement around the bandstand?
You know, again, Barry Covington, I just leave it like it is. I wouldn't make any different changes at all. I mean, something that we can consider or the city commissioners consider in the future, but I think the way I wouldn't change the RCDP because of it.
This is John Dewey. I would agree with Barry to not change the language in the CDP. To me, this feels a little bit like micromanagement coming from the commenters, and I would leave it alone.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any objections? Okay, we'll leave it as is.
Two other comments that came from DART relate to challenges and obstacles for DART at the bandstand stop, as well as whether the town or the city has a vision of improved DART service and what that improved service might be.
What are you talking about? What number?
123 and 124.
Thank you.
Does that fall within the city's purview rather than the planning commission?
For number 123, I would think that that's more of a DART item than an item for the city to tackle. They're asking for us to provide description and challenges for DART, so that seems more an operational thing that they would need to address. And then if there are any components of the DART service that the Planning Commission would like to see improved, whether that is different routes, timing, that type of thing, we can incorporate that, or if we wanted to leave that for more of a mayor and commissioner discussion, that's acceptable as well.
I would suggest we
Is
simply...
are these two items required for us to act on, or is this just something that they've noted and we don't have to take any action at this point? Because there is a lot more detail and analysis that's needed at multiple levels just to address these two what seemingly are very small issues.
We are not required to address these. These are part of the recommendations that they suggested we consider, but we do not have to make any modifications to address them.
In that case, I would recommend that we don't make any modifications whatsoever and allow this to be considered at a future date, either by the city or by DART themselves, because it requires, just as with the housing issue, it requires much more in-depth analysis than just this rather superficial kind of thing. So I would just leave it and move on.
Does anyone have any
Agree.
objection to Mr. Strange's
I
proposal?
agree.
Okay.
So
Any
do I.
objections? All right. Thank you, Lauren.
The next item is number 136. This comes from DENREC through the PLUS process. They had just noted some additional action items that they are recommending the city include for both energy efficiency and renewable energy infrastructure. So some of those are to conduct a planning effort related to sustainable energy, utilize renewable energy infrastructure such as solar and wind to reduce pollution, reviewing codes to ensure barriers do not exist for solar deployment on rooftops or in ground arrays, adopting energy efficiency measures in building design and redevelopment, and adopting a mechanism to provide information on the state's weatherization assistance program. So again, these are for you to consider, but are not required to be addressed.
What's the consensus?
I think that's well stated what they've suggested here. I would like for one to see it put into the CDP.
This sort of goes back towards the design guideline things in terms of what I was talking about before, in terms of environmentally friendly or advantageous things to do. I don't disagree with Barry here. I mean, if we include just these things as potential suggestions, I would not have a problem including them.
Anyone else? And again, it's just a recommendation to us. So, Mr. Kaufman, what you're saying is that we might include a reference to these. Anything other than that?
You could do it in the actual CDP, or you could put it in sort of as an appendix item, that these are the types of environmentally friendly techniques that the city might want to in the future using.
So it's our recommendation, not our action item. Is that correct?
Yes.
Anyone else?
I agree.
Now, Lauren, would this trigger any kind of another PLUS review?
It would not, because this was a comment that a PLUS agency brought up in the first place, so we are responding to their comment.
All right. Anything else on this particular matter?
Where would you put it, Lauren? Yeah.
I think
Lauren, we're
perhaps including it as, if we included it as an action item to consider incorporating these types of measures or planning efforts, keeping it in that type of phrasing. That way, there's the possibility of looking into them further, but again, not committing the city to actually putting in any particular code updates or anything like that.
sounds right to me.
All right, we'll go with that.
Okay. The only other things that I want to bring up, We did, as I mentioned previously, Susan Gay had provided some more technical comments, and by that I mean some examples of those are in a section we reference a city code number or reference. That item is under review by the mayor and commissioners, so there's the potential that the specific number changes. So we may want to not address that or include that number specifically, or this capital item in the draft number 5 references fiscal year 22, it's now 23, things like that. So the vast majority of comments are more of those quote unquote technical items that are just refining or correcting that type of language. But 2 items that she did bring up. One is a note regarding telecommunications. She had mentioned that with the 5G trends and potential zoning implications that may have, it being a service that visitors increasingly want, she noted that the mayor and commissioners passed an ordinance in April that amended the code related to small wireless communications facility design manual, and that she's requesting that the CDP have a paragraph that briefly explains those steps that the city has taken, so that it's in the CDP and can be there for example, to leverage some funding opportunities, or to just describe the benefit without an adverse impact to the community. So that was one item. Just wanted to gauge your reaction about incorporating that brief information. If you are so inclined, we can include that in the draft language that we bring back to you for the next meeting.
Mr. Strange, I believe, has a great deal of expertise and interest in this matter. What do you think, Mike?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Oh, I said you have a great deal of expertise and interest in this area. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, yeah. I presented at actually multiple meetings, and I've submitted multiple letters to the city, and I disagreed with them vehemently on several sections of the code they just implemented, although they went ahead and implemented anyway. But I think what's important here is to put it in perspective is that the previous CDP did not mention 5G, 4G, or any G for that matter. But what it did talk about was viewscapes and the higher level philosophical issues that any technology has to meet. And under the Federal Communications Commission rules, and in fact under Delaware code, with regard to areas that are under DelDOT's control, which the state ceded all of the wireless stuff to them. I think getting too much detail in the CDP on a particular technology is inappropriate. And what you need to do is do it at the highest level, just as it was done in the previous CDP, is putting that technology within the context of what is needed and what we're allowed to do under the Federal Communications rules. And there are 3 basic non-exempted rules that apply at all times. One is that they have to be reasonable. And the second is they have to be similar to what you apply to all other infrastructure in your city. And they have to be published in advance. Well, the published in advance is what's happening right now with the specific details. But I think the CDP still needs to do it at the highest level in terms of viewscapes. So I would disagree that it should get into the nitty-gritty of a particular technology, because 5G is already, if you want to look at it philosophically, is technologically obsolete, and 6G is already on the drawing board that's going to replace it. So I think it should be done again at the highest level of goals and objectives, which is what the CDP is, and then allow the detail to filter down as we do now within our building and zoning code, and that it is addressed within the zoning code. The telecommunications issue on public property is, and I discussed this with Glenn, and eventually I'll discuss it with Luke. raises a whole series of questions. And quite frankly, with regard to the Planning Commission, on public property, there are certain installations by telecom companies that probably should never occurred because they never came to the PC for prior approval. But that's another story. So my opinion is we put as little as possible into the CDP, except in the context of the 3 non-exempted requirements that we are allowed to do. And most of that relates to viewscape and the environment. I'm done.
Anyone else? Certainly keeping it at the highest level, as Mike Strange has noted, will not go out of date quickly. And so is there any objection to adopting his approach on this? All right, Lauren.
The other item from Ms. Gay that I would like to bring up relates to the section in Chapter 7 on impervious surfaces. We had discussed the Resilient Communities Partnership Program, the study and the efforts the city undertook as part of that with some of the neighboring beach communities. And she notes that she notes the language that we use to describe that, which says, a few specific recommendations were included in that effort for Rehoboth, et cetera. But she notes that there are no associated goals or action items specific to that, and that perhaps something should be included referencing those recommendations, something like that. So perhaps to evaluate or investigate code changes to reduce impervious surface coverage rather than one obligating the city to change the code. So that was her suggestion. Again, just looking for your input on how we might incorporate or address that.
Now, this CDP next, if it's voted to forward it to the Board of Commissioners and the mayor, they have an opportunity to go through and review and revise and public hearing and all sorts of other matters, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing is we can do our best, but if we don't achieve what that body thinks is appropriate, that they have the power to change it.
Correct.
All right, having said that, does anybody have any thoughts?
Leave it alone.
Do you have suggested language, Lauren, or is it simply a matter of referencing or not referencing? Yeah.
I do not have language currently, but something, a potential could be something to, as broad as evaluating potential code changes to that would lead to reduced impervious surface coverages or something to that effect. So again, that's something that would be undertaken through more detailed looks at the zoning code. And that's something that, for example, could go along with some of the comments that we received from Plus, from DENREC. We can relate it back to some of those so that there's no re-triggering of Plus review as a result. I mean, that's a pretty, there isn't, I don't think there's going to be too much of a problem incorporating the language in that type of verbiage.
I think as the commission, then the choice is yes or no. Do we put something in, or do we simply not address that at this point? And if the city commissioners wish to, they certainly can.
Ellison here. I support including something very general because I think it is an important subject that we, I don't think, have addressed adequately.
Anyone else?
I agree with Jim. This is a big issue in terms of homeowners, in terms of their lot coverage. And at some point it's going to require the commissioners to take some specific action in the code. Because you can up lot coverage and then you're supposed to limit the amount of imperviousness that you have. So I agree with Jim that maybe something general right now would be best.
Is that the consensus?
Yes.
All right, Lauren.
Okay. That is it from my standpoint of items that I particularly wanted to bring up. But at this point, you all have copies of the initial recommendations that we developed to address the comments received since February 1st. So if it's all right, my suggestion would be to open it up to hear from any of the Planning Commission that either has questions or disagrees with any of our recommendations.
Last call. All right, Lauren, the silence is deafening.
Good job.
All right, now, just so our agenda is pretty clear where we're headed, a special meeting, a special virtual meeting has been scheduled for next Wednesday, the 4th, I believe it is, of May, at which time the only topic will be consideration and possible vote. Let me see here. Consideration and possible vote on the CDP. Hopefully it's the latter. And so I'm hopeful, given the virtual nature of the meeting, that we all can attend, and that when do you think you might have your revised document, the revised CDP, ready?
We are going to be working on this over the weekend, so I'm hoping that Monday morning we'll be able to send that out. As soon as it is completed, I'll send that out for your review and share it with the city to be posted.
Yes, post it on the website, please.
If there are any changes to that, I will let you know. I think that most of the remaining comments, none of them are too involved or difficult to address. It's just a matter of getting that documentation correct and doing our final QA/QC.
Okay, so you only have 2 more work days this weekend, is that correct?
That's what it sounds like.
All right. So if we can, everybody please focus on what comes out on Monday, and let's see if we can bring this over the goal line on Wednesday. And that way we can get it to the Board of Commissioners and Mayor a week earlier than had been anticipated, which I'm sure they will appreciate because they have their work to do. And we will then turn our attention to other matters.
Mike, this is Luke. I have one suggestion.
Yep.
For Lauren. Just for procedurally and just to make sure the record is clear, Lauren, if there's a way to ensure not only that changes against draft 5 are redlined, but maybe summarized at the beginning to expedite the commission's review. I know there's a lot of work on your end, but some way to facilitate an expeditious review of the changes against draft 5 would help.
So you're suggesting a red line, is that correct, Luke?
A red line and maybe a summary where the changes are located. It's a long document.
We will be making all of the changes in Word in the track changes format. So when we send that out, we'll include both that and the quote unquote finalized document that has accepted all of those changes. We'll also revise this comment spreadsheet with our recommendations, and we will have the items highlighted where changes were made. So that should be a pretty comprehensive view of what changes were made specifically, and we'll make sure that that notes where the changes were made, et cetera, so that that is available for both the Planning Commission as well as the public.
Could I request one other thing? Lauren, when you do the red line, could you do the red line in a different font? So written out in black and white, you can still tell that it was a change and it's not red. Can you do that?
I can, I believe that when we do the red line, it is in, it by its nature will show up as red, but any additions are underlined and any deletions have a strike through.
That may
Is
be,
that
that may be
sufficient?
what you get, Steve. That may be the best.
Yeah,
they
that'll
can
do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, anything else on today's agenda? I think we've worked through what the agenda items are. And unless there's anything else, we're adjourned. Thank you.